Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today's episode and the next episode, which will be released on Thursday, are breakdowns of my top 17 prospects in the NBA draft. We've gone to 17 because that is where my tier system ends. So I have the top 4 tiers broken out on my board. And then I have a tier 5 and a tier 6, obviously. But within those top 4 tiers is where all of these players lie. For me, those are guys that I think are probably NBA starters, but potentially more like rotation players or very complementary starters. So Cole, we're joined here by Cole Zwicker, by the way, because we did this last year and it was super fun when we did it last year. Cole, I've kind of run through my top 17 to you. What is your overarching thought on it before we really get into the weeds?
Well, I think that it's important to suss out exactly what each tier means to you. And like you said in the introduction, you're looking at maybe potentially low-end starters when you start working your way down the list, but everybody has starter equity. Is that how you'd summarize it overall? And how do you view, is each tier drop-off more of a drop-off in talent, or do you build into the calculus more drop-off and potential outcome? Like if you talk about the first tier, maybe those are the higher ceiling guys and you kind of work your way down. Is that how you go about it?
For me, everything is an expected value equation whenever it comes to NBA draft prospects. So like someone like Mikal Porter, for instance, who will be featured, I think, on the next podcast, on the Thursday podcast. You have to consider the fact that his ceiling outcome is genuinely best player in the draft. I think that he probably is maybe third in terms of ceiling for me. Like I would have DeAndre Ayton. I would have maybe Mohamed Bamba and then probably Mikal Porter. Like you could make a case he's even like number 2 for ceiling outcome for me. But there's so much downside risk with him because what if the IQ never comes along? What if the back injury becomes a significant factor? What if some of the stuff you hear about him as a teammate become an issue? So that kind of knocks it down a few pegs just because the downside with him is so strong. Now, he'll probably end up somewhere in the middle, and I think all of these guys probably end up somewhere in the middle of where we're projecting here. But I think that it's important to note that I consider everything to be just basically an expected value equation where I, try and say 10%, 15% star, 20% all-star, and I'm just throwing these numbers out there. I'm not equivocating them to Mikal Porter. 20% starter, 20% rotation player, and then like 20% bust. All of those numbers are going to be different for people, but they all have to play a role in how you adjust a big board, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to iron that out for the listeners. I think that it's really interesting kind of juggling floor and ceiling. For me, I value ceiling really highly, but I also value like a floor safety to value. I think you kind of have to consider factors like put yourself in the shoes of some GMs. If you're drafting Mikal Porter, you have to consider the back injury. You have to consider the character issues that have been reported and the potential downside, especially in a class like this where there are other really high ceiling outcome players that are just safer to value right now because we've seen the production, we've seen the performance at the college level. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of differentiate and delineate between the different tiers and kind of how you formulate that, because I do think that's important. Like for me, tiers don't necessarily mean like a drop off in expected value. It might be more like my confidence factor in these guys. Maybe if you go from tier 1 to tier 2, it's not necessarily like a guy in tier 3 can't be the number 1 player in the draft. I think that's important. It's not like you're saying the guys in the first tier are like infinitely more likely to be the best player in the draft and other people have no equity. It's more like your confidence factor, and for you the expected value maybe of the tier 1 guys is just higher than the guys in tier 3 or 4.
Yeah, no, I think that that's exactly right. And then the other thing that I would note here is that this is something you and I talk about regularly. This is all in a vacuum when NBA teams themselves aren't drafting in said vacuum. So like,
yes,
if I am the Clippers, I am probably going to take both Kevin Knox and Shai Alexander and Collin Sexton and guys like that over someone like a Mikal Bridges or even a Miles Bridges maybe, because I want to have a slightly higher ceiling outcome because the Clippers are in the middle of a pretty substantial retool. I wouldn't call it a rebuild just because they have the assets with which they can get this thing going pretty quickly. But whenever I have multiple venues and multiple avenues with which to acquire talent like that, and I'm in the middle of kind of restarting things, I'm more willing to take a bet on higher ceiling players. Now, if I'm Philadelphia and I already have my 2 high usage players that I think can lead me to where I need to go, and I have max cap space this summer, I will probably, like if I was them, I would probably have Mikal Bridges at like 5th on my board or something like that, like 5th or 6th, because he just holds an inordinate value to them as a potential plus defender who can knock down 40% of his threes.
Yeah, that's really well said, and it bears mentioning that every team has a different big board. If we did this not in a vacuum, when we actually did big boards for specific teams, they would look a lot different because you factor in competitiveness right now. How ready are they to compete? Are they not going to compete for 5-6 years? I do think at the top of the draft, for the most part, you're going to take best player available. But when you start getting to like the 6 through 16 range, there's a lot of different ways a team can approach that. So that's just important because we're mostly dealing with, you're much more well sourced than I am, so you have more intel, so maybe that factors into your analysis. But we're mostly judging things by what we've seen, not via personal workouts and interviews like these teams, where I honestly think for most teams, like the interviews and the personal workouts they have in their own building are as or more important as college tape. But for us, it's predominantly judged by college tape. I think that would be a fair assessment, correct? Yeah,
every team has different values in the pre-draft process. Like the Lakers, for instance, are a team that value pre-draft workouts and value getting a guy into their gym, having them run through that crazy shooting drill that they do at the end of games to measure your endurance. That is an organization that puts a bit more of a value on the pre-draft workout. There are some that don't really care how you work out. They just want to get you in there to be able to meet you and understand what makes you tick and have you for longer than like the speed dating session that is the NBA draft combine. I think they get them for like 30 minutes there. So it is all going to be very different for each NBA team. The way that I tend to do things obviously is more based off of tape. Intel definitely comes into play for me. It's one of the reasons that I was very high on Jason Tatum last year. Everything you hear about Jason Tatum is that he's an incredibly hard worker, super smart, gonna absolutely reach whatever his ceiling is. Someone like Josh Jackson got knocked down my board a little bit last year because he had the multiple incidents at Kansas, and some of that stuff scared me off a little bit. So it's all a big, messy, factor of, everything that you have to put into this thing. And every team is going to value it differently. And, this is kind of just where my starting point would be if I was ranking them as prospects in a vacuum.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. At the end of the day, we're just taking calculated risks and educated guesses on these guys. It's all a betting process, not like a legitimate betting process, but you're just betting on guys that you feel comfortable with what you've seen, what you've heard. I think that'll be reflected in your rankings.
Yeah, it's basically like a stock market game, kind of. Like you are basically playing the stock market. It's like we are dealing with billions. Like the TV show Billions. We are Bobby Axelrod. This is basically what's happening here. Before we get into that top 17 guys, I've read you who my top 17 is. Who are the next 3 guys that were not in my top 17 that you point to that you really like?
I think for me, it comes down. Did you say Robert Williams out of?
I do have Williams in the top 17.
Okay. So for me, then it would probably be D'Anthony Melton. I'm just really high on, so he's that next guy for me. Mitchell Robinson, I don't know too much about the individual character reports, so take that with a grain of salt. I just think from a talent standpoint, at that standpoint in the draft, if he can reach his same ceiling that he showed at AAU levels of being an outstanding rim protector and just lob catch radius threat on the offensive end, I think you have to kind of treat that as legitimate. I think that's a legitimate skill depending on how well he can move in space. And then I have Kevin Huerter there too, just as I think the best off movement, off balance shooter potentially in the class of wings. Trae Young I think is the best overall shooter, but just a guy who can come off a pin down at 6'7", hit shots on the move. So just with how valuable that skill set is in the modern game, I would have him in that calculus too. But those are the 3 guys that really stand out to me.
Yeah, the next 3 guys on my board are Chandler Hutchison. I have at number 20, 6'7", 7-foot wingspan. Obviously a really great driver, can handle the ball, can pass it. I think he's going to be able to shoot it at some point just because I really trust how hard he works. I trust Phil Beckner is a great development guy who will work with him going forward. I just believe in his athleticism, personality, his just kind of everything that he presents as a prospect. You mentioned Kevin Huerter. I have him at number 19, I believe, on my board. And then the guy that I'm way higher on than everyone else, I think, is Melvin Frazier. I have Melvin Frazier at 18 on my board. I think he's going to be able to legit play everywhere from the 2 through the 4. He's going to defend everyone at a high level, I think, including lead guards. And I think he's going to be able to shoot it at some point. Like, he's a 37% shooter from 3 this year. Elite level athlete who's going to get out on the break. He can pass it a little bit as well. Big fan of Melvin Frazier and what he presents.
I like that. I watched his tape back last night a little bit. I am buying the shot more. He started to catch more in rhythm on the hop this past season. I still don't know. I really value off movement shooting for wings. I think that's the easiest way. That's the easiest way into the league right now, is just being able to function in more of these motion type sets. I don't feel confident about him off movement, so I have him a little lower, but the shot has progressed. I mean, I know a lot of analytics guys will point to the downside of betting on a guy who develops shooting at a later stage in his career, but I'm interested in his overall game, especially on ball defensively. Off ball, I don't think he's great there. So at a certain point in the draft, though, he's a great guy to get, into your locker room, into your developmental system, and see if you can really hone in on those skills, especially on the offensive end, the shooting. If you can get that guy shooting off a pin down at all, if he ever has that in his game, I think that's going to be huge for him because, like you said, the defense is really alluring, especially on ball. Yeah,
like, he is, for me, I don't know if he's the best perimeter defender in the draft just because, like, Kyrie Thomas and Javon Carter exist, but he might be the most switchable defender in the draft just because that dude is strong and he is huge. Like, I know he's 6'6", but he has a 7'2" wingspan, and he came in at, like, I want to say he had like an 8'8" standing reach, which is basically just a level below Jordan Bell, if I remember correctly. So, like, he is a big dude. He's a strong dude, and I just look at what his defensive impact can be, and, like, that's a guy that I want in my locker room.
Yeah, I mean, it's a defensive argument for sure. The switchability at that size is going to be alluring if he can shoot the ball. It just all comes down to the shot, really.
Yeah. The thing that I've been posing to folks around the league is, like, you and I and everyone else have Mikal Bridges ahead of Melvin Frazier on their boards because he's just a safer bet. But, like, what is the percentage that Mikal Bridges or that Melvin Frazier is better than Mikal Bridges? Like, I think that it's like 30% that he ends up being a better player.
That's really interesting because I do think in so many ways they are different as far as I trust Mikal's shot off movement way more. Like you said, he's safer because of that. He's a better team defender than Frazier by a pretty significant margin, but Frazier's better on the ball. Like, Mikal isn't ultra athletic on the ball as far as quick twitch. So it depends on what your scheme is, honestly. If you run a lot of switching, Melvin Frazier might actually be better for that scheme defensively. It just comes down to, again, the shot and how much you buy Frazier actually partaking in modern NBA offenses at a high level.
Yep. But let's get into the top 17 rankings here. And as the internet's preeminent Zhaire Smith podcast, it's only right that we start there. Zhaire Smith is number 17 on my board. You're going to have him much higher, correct?
I'll probably have him. I'm going to have him higher for sure. He's going to be in the 11 to 15 range for me.
Interesting. So we're actually not, like, crazy far off on Zhaire Smith anymore.
Nope. No, I think post-combine, not just because of the measurements being a little lackluster. I don't want to put too much into that because it's not like you measure in at like 6'2", but 6'4", with a 6'10" wingspan, pretty strong. But for me, it just came down to mostly the intangibles. Like, he's a great kid, great worker. I just don't know if he's going to improve at a rate that he's going to need to have star equity, but I do think he has really awesome, like, role player equity at the highest levels.
Yeah, like, that's the big thing that I've been kind of asking around about is, do people believe that Zhaire Smith is going to really improve his game? Any executive I talk to, I've been like, hey, this is the guy that I feel like you guys and I have the least handle on, because just from where he was a year ago, Zhaire Smith was a late commit to Texas Tech who was barely a top 200 recruit in the 2017 recruiting class. This has been like a rocket ship of like stock boosting. And because of that, a lot of NBA executives hadn't gotten a chance to see him up until November, December, January, whenever they started to get reports, saying like, hey, this dude, you probably should go see him. That creates a very difficult situation sometimes for evaluators to process because they have to get a handle on players. They have to figure out exactly how comfortable they are, especially with guys like Zhaire Smith, who are so incomplete as players. Because even you would admit, Zhaire Smith is nowhere near the point where he is going to make a substantial offensive impact in the NBA right now, right?
100%. I think that has to be built into this calculus overall, is that he has to have major strides in his skill game, in his IQ game offensively, to really be the player that I thought he could be before. I still think he has that ability, but yeah, you have to factor in that this guy could be 3 to 4 years away from contributing. He has to iron out the mechanics. They've been inconsistent in the past. He's not a high-level creator, so he just doesn't profile cleanly into the modern game because his shooting is not really bankable unless it's like wide open off the catch, and even that you can't really bank on. So there's upside, but he's so hard to fit in a specific role as far as modern NBA goes.
Yeah, like offensive skill set wise, he's basically a 4 right now. He is like a 6'4" 4-man that is beneath 200 pounds. 2.2 offensive rebounds per game. Over 1 steal, over 1 block, 55.6 field goal percentage. Not a guy that took a ton of threes this year, but when he took them, hit them at 45%. Not a guy that drew a ton of fouls this year either. Where he makes his impact is as a team defender, first and foremost. It was on the Big 12's all-defense team as a freshman. I think that was a well-deserved honor. Very, very smart at playing gap defense, very good at guarding up and down the lineup despite his size, and generally a smart defender who gets into passing lanes and really makes an impact on that end.
What I like about him is he's the most functional athlete in the draft to me. He just applies it to both ends of the floor. And for his age, you rarely see guys with his athleticism that really apply it that way. Rebounding, like you said, as a team defender, he can really close out. He covers ground, and he can really harass guys. When he gets on your hip, defending on the ball, like Texas Tech forces mostly everything to the baseline, so he can stay on your hip, and he really challenges and finishes plays, contesting shots at the rim. He just applies it in so many different ways, and it's rare to see, again, a guy with his athleticism have that kind of blue-collar mentality. He does all the small things. So if you think that he can do bigger things like self-creation mostly and shooting, he has all the small things in his game that you don't see a lot of guys, again, with his athletic pedigree have.
Yeah, like the guy you and I compared him to throughout the course of the season was Hamidou Diallo. Hamidou Diallo, up until about, what I would say, February, didn't really apply his athleticism to the floor in the way that you would hope. He is not a good enough ball handler to use that athleticism in the half court. His defensive impact was not great throughout the course of the year, but in the last month of the year, he really started to make an impact on defense and started to utilize his athleticism in a strong way. Zhaire Smith came in, just immediately made an impact, and I think that's something to note for him.
Yeah, I think for the Hamidou Diallo comparison, it was mostly like that was what Hamidou Diallo should have been. Like we said, with Zhaire, like that kind of functional athlete. If you're just going to be kind of a raw overall player, which is kind of what Zhaire is on offense. I mean, he was playing the 4, like you noted, in a motion type scheme, so it's not really that projectable to the NBA because he's not going to be able to play the same role. But if you have that kind of raw player, you want him to apply his athleticism to both sides and just play hard with a high degree of energy. And that's something that he did that you hoped a guy like Diallo did, and it wasn't the case for the most part of the season. But that's where Zhaire wins, are the little things. Like you noted, the attacking the offensive glass. He's a terrific offensive rebounder. He's a physical player. He sets screens. He will mix it up with bigs on the inside. Just does a lot of really small things that maybe will fly by for most guys, even though like his highlight dunks are going to captivate pretty much everybody. Yeah,
like Zhaire Smith this year, he's 6'2.75" without shoes on, so like not a tall human being. 15.6% of his offensive possessions came on putbacks this year. That is not normal. 67.2% of his shots this year came around the basket. That is not normal for a guy that size who is an off guard, essentially. The big question with him is the jump shot. The metrics, for a limited sample, he took 67 jump shots this year, either off the shot or either off the dribble or off the catch. 89th percentile off the catch. 57th percentile off the dribble. Again, 45% from 3 this year. What do we think of his jump shot overall?
For me, it just comes down to, I think he does have some natural touch. When he does shoot off the catch, when he has time and space, you see a lot of swishes in his game that might seem kind of ridiculous to say, but I do think he has natural touch for being this limited of a shooter overall. He has nothing off movement at all as far as setting his feet quickly. Like when the off screen on Synergy, most of that stuff is like he comes off a pin down, he gets like 3 or 4 seconds to set his feet, and that's not going to be the case at the NBA level. You got to get your shot off quicker, but I do think he has at least the foundation of touch, and if you can really iron out the mechanics, again, I think they deviated last season. Sometimes he'd bring the ball over his head, especially from distance threes, and it was more of a flatter shot, but you did see the flashes as far as pull-up ability. Like his step backs, he can definitely create space basically at will because he's so explosive in and out of his moves. He just doesn't have a ton of moves, but you can see the flash plays with him as far as self-creation. If he gets that handle under control, he can face up a guy, give him like a double crossover or something eventually, step back, and then knock down a jump shot because he can shoot with a little backward momentum. So there's upside, but at the same time, I don't think you can really necessarily bank on a shot coming through at even a league average level.
Yeah, like I think that he basically needs to be a league average shooter, though, to become an NBA starter. And that's why he's more of like a late tier 4 guy for me, because otherwise I think it's hard for him to make an impact offensively because he's not a guy who is comfortable like attacking closeouts and being a secondary ball handler at his size. It's just he's not going to really create a whole lot for himself. He's going to get his buckets on offensive rebounding. He's going to back cut. He's going to do the smart high IQ things, but he's not going to be much of a creator. And I think that is going to be a situation that could lend itself to him being, kind of a 4-on-5 offensive type player.
It's definitely arguable for sure. If he can get guys to close out hard to his jump shot, that's going to be key because he can get to the basket so quickly. Like he can 1-2 dribble and he can explode off one. He's probably the quickest leaper in the class as far as off the floor explosiveness. So, I mean, I think he can attack closeouts. He has a functional handle enough for that, but I agree with you as far as running a secondary pick and roll. Right now, I don't think that's even in the cards. Like you see him split pick and roll occasionally his freshman year, but it's not like high level stuff. He doesn't have a lot of passing anticipation. It's hard to profile him in an exact offensive role. For me, it comes down to how much do you believe in the kid here? Like, I never thought he was Donovan Mitchell as far as upside, just because you hear Donovan Mitchell talk and he's like, he really pops. But if a team feels comfortable and puts him in the right developmental situation, like if he goes to the Clippers, somehow if they take him 12 or 13, that's probably on the higher end of his outcome range as far as being drafted. Just a team with more of a long-term view, and you can really develop the skills. I'm kind of worried that he goes to a team that just tries to plug and play him a little bit, and then he never develops his skills, and you never see him really take that next step. I think if you are drafting him in the top 20, you want to get a situation where he can actually develop, like especially as a shooter, maybe even a self-creator, to give him some opportunities to do that.
Yeah, let's move on. Troy Brown at number 16 for me. Kind of a similar skill set question, except he's 6'7". And that actually matters to me. He's a multi-positional defender, 6'7", about a 7-foot wingspan, 215 pounds already, averaged 11.3 points, shot 53% from 2-point range this year. Terrible jump shooter right now, 29% from 3. But the mechanics aren't a disaster when you see them up close. Like he's actually pretty okay there. The big thing is that he's a great passer and playmaker, both in space and in the half court. And again, the defense I think is actually pretty darn solid for a player that, is a freshman playing in Oregon in what was maybe the messiest situation this year, just because they had this weird mix of young players with, Peyton Pritchard and him and Kenny Wooten, and then a bunch of, grad transfer seniors like Elijah Brown and Mikal McIntosh coming in, trying to make an impact that way. It was a tough situation for him to blend into immediately. I don't think that he was totally successful at doing it, but I think that I still believe in his overall talent to the point where I'm comfortable taking him in the top 20.
He's someone that I absolutely loved at lower levels, like watching him at the Hoop Summit, the way he plays on the wing, 6'7" guy with point guard ability, played point guard in high school. He has those ball skills as far as a tight handle. He can really pass. He has anticipation there. He can make cross-court reads, get passes, and pick and roll. There's so many aspects of his game that I really like, and I think that will be valuable. But the main conditional skills, again, is the shooting. Does he have the ability to make a catch and shoot three? Can he shoot anything off movement? Can he create his own shot? He's not a high-level athlete as far as functionally on the floor. He's a limited leaper. I think that hurts him in a lot of different capacities. He's just not very explosive. His body build, his posture, he always feels like he's kind of hunched over a little bit. I feel like that affects his balance in multiple levels, like defensively as well. He gets run through way too often defensively. You think he's got a great frame, right? He's 210, 215.
Yep.
So I hope that improves. If he can improve his athleticism, his lateral quickness, I really like so many skills. But again, this is like something I've fallen off on in the past as far as betting on guys who I love as far as IQ, handle, ball skills. You want to dribble, pass, shoot in the modern game. But if you aren't a high-level athlete and you can't shoot necessarily, I just think there's a lot of downside here. But I love the kid. He's been killing workouts because he's a great interview. He's really bright. So I'm betting on him. I love the guy again. But it's a tough sell for me to really bet super high on him. I think 16 is a fine range, but much higher than that. You see him kind of getting reported around like 10, 11. Probably, I think 11 is probably where his range starts, actually. But it's just I don't know. He does a lot of things well, but does he do the most important things well enough?
Yeah, and again, you kind of mentioned the idea of betting on the kid here. That's basically what I'm doing, just from speaking to people around the game. This is a dude that you will never hear a bad word about. Like, he is a very mature kid. Obviously has a great high IQ basketball game, although the turnovers this year I think are a little bit worrisome. But he is generally a high IQ basketball player, and that stuff translates to the way he operates off the floor as well. Super hard worker. In Vegas right now, working out pretty regularly. Now he's traveling around, obviously dealing with team workouts. I am generally comfortable just betting on him getting better and hopefully becoming the kind of jump shooter that I think he has potential to become. 29% from three is a bad number. There's no getting around that. It is an exceptionally poor number, and he has to at least get to the point where he's a 33% NBA three-point shooter to be valuable, I think. But he's going around selling himself as like an Andre Iguodala type who can play some point, who can, be a multi-positional defender, and I think that that's where his value lies. I think that you could even potentially play him as like a big point guard in some lineups in the NBA and just go super big and super switchable.
That's really interesting. I do like his defensive technique on the ball. He definitely takes pride in his defense. I like his footwork. He tries hard. You can just tell that he knows what he's doing on the floor. I thought his team defense fell off over the course of the season. Maybe some of that is due to situation or whatnot and being engaged. But he brings a lot of alluring qualities. Again, I think that maybe he can initiate an offense. The problem with me is just the lack of burst and the lack of pull-up ability. Yeah. Like he's flashed the pull-up shot, but it's not something that's really built into his game at a high level. So in theory, I like that output. I mean, if you can go bigger and play him at the point guard and you're more of a motion scheme, so he kind of just initiates, throws the ball, and then starts moving off of it. I like that. I really wish he was like 6'8", 6'9", and he was like a playmaking 4. Yeah. That's where I think he could just absolutely destroy. So, again, I love the kid. I think you're going to see a lot of high reports after workouts with teams just because he is such a great kid, and guys are going to feel really comfortable with him putting time in the gym and really improving. That's the allure with him, is that you just know there's not going to be any issues off the floor, and he's really going to work hard. He's so young that maybe he can develop these skills.
Yeah, and with Troy Brown and the like Andre Iguodala comparison, the thing to remember too is like Iguodala when he was young, super, super elite athlete. Like the elite of the elite athletes, should have won a dunk contest, like had that same mix of 6'7" size and length, and was just all of the burst, basically. Troy Brown doesn't have that, but he does have good feet on defense. I don't think you're talking about an impact Andre Iguodala potential defensive player of the year guy. I do think that he's going to be a plus defender who can initiate some actions, and it's all going to come down to the jump shot. And if he can actually shoot the ball, then maybe you're talking about a starter. But I think more you're talking about, in all likelihood, either a fifth starter or a high-end rotation player.
Yeah, and I get why he's selling himself as Iguodala as far as just being a Swiss Army knife at that size. That makes a lot of sense from like a marketing standpoint. Like his game overall, that is his strength, that he can do a lot of different things. But yeah, he's not Iguodala. He's not even close to Iguodala as an athlete, as an on-ball stopper. I mean, Iguodala is one of the best like 3 or 4 perimeter defenders of the last 20 years. So I don't think that's even in Troy Brown's overall ceiling outcome, but I
No.
get why he would say that as far as just being the ultimate glue guy, team guy who can just do a bunch of different things. He can do that at a ceiling outcome, I think, and be a passable defender, even though, again, I think the athleticism is really going to hurt him in several respects. Like, he can't even really, like, offensively, attacking closeouts sometimes, he can't even, like, get by that initial guy, closing out hard to him just because he just doesn't have that high-level burst. A lot of it's tied to, can he develop, can he improve his posture, can he develop his explosiveness? If he can do that, I do think he has many traits that are conducive to winning basketball in the modern NBA.
Number 15, Robert Williams. One of the hardest evals in this 2018 NBA draft class. 10.4 points, 9.2 rebounds this season, 63.2% from the field. Also blocked 2.6 shots per game. The book on Robert Williams is that he is the ultimate once he gets to the NBA guy, right? Because Texas A&M played him in what was, from a lineup perspective, the most dysfunctional way to get the most out of his skill set that any team could have possibly utilized him in. They essentially played him only at the 4 next to Tyler Davis and DJ Hogue, and sometimes even next to like Tony Trocha Morelos, who is a center in his own right. Like Texas A&M this year, as everyone else was going small in college basketball, occasionally played 3 centers. And that is not something that you want to do with him. He's not a guy who had a ton of opportunity in pick and rolls. And in reality, you look at his combination of athleticism, his 6'10" size, his 7'5" wingspan. That's the kind of guy who might be the best pick and roll playmaker in this draft class. Where are you at on the enigma that is Robert Williams at this stage?
I actually probably wouldn't end up with him in the exact same spot that you do, maybe 15, 16, around that range. So we're seeing him through the same vantage point. He's not going to have the same role that he had in college. He's a 5 at the NBA level. Clint Capella might have made Robert Williams some money, honestly, just as far as a switchable defender who has length. I think that he profiles probably the most similar to him in the draft. Like, Williams can be a dynamic lob catcher in pick and roll dive situations, and he just didn't get a lot of chance to showcase that. But we know he has it. If you watch the film, you can easily see enough evidence for that. Like, he's that kind of athlete. It just comes down to, for me, how good is his overall defense? When he's engaged in the plays in front of him, if he's in like a 1-5 pick and roll switch setting, I think he's going to be fine there. Honestly, I think he has the feet to hang. He has the length definitely to contest. He's going to be good in those situations. It comes for me, the motor, especially off the ball. Can this guy make the rotations? Is he going to be engaged all the time? When there's motor concerns for bigs, that's probably one of the biggest red flags, just because you want bigs to be playing hard and engaged at all times defensively. But if you read like Clint Capella's scouting report coming into the league, he had a lot of these same questions. So situation's going to be big for him. Does he have an organization that really keeps him focused? Because if you do, you have, a modern NBA big, save for the fact that he can't shoot. That's really his big holdup, is he doesn't have that dual threat pick and pop ability where he can, pop to the 3-point line, put the ball on the floor. He's more of a straight dive guy who can also pass. His passing is really underrated as far as making reads. So you can see him kind of playing that Jordan Bell short roll position, at the next level. I think he can do that stuff. But again, how valuable really, this is a philosophy thing, how valuable is a big who can switch and pass and rim run, but at the highest levels of play, he can't really post mismatches to a high level and he can't shoot. So that's what it comes down to for me. Yeah,
and on the plus side for the motor, Robert Williams is a dude who, if you talk to him about it, even before like he was coached for pre-draft and stuff like that, like even before his agents were giving him the answers of what to say, he's someone who will legitimately tell you, my motor just has to run harder. Like I have to play harder all the time instead of just in bursts. And I like that self-awareness, but it's now year 2 that we saw the same issue, right?
Yes.
And it's really hard to kind of line those two things up in a lot of ways. The big question that I still don't really have a great feel for him is how good of a perimeter defender he is. How good are his feet on the perimeter? Even though he played the 4, Texas A&M plays a good amount of zone and didn't necessarily put him in a ton of positions to where you got a chance to see him sit down on an island one-on-one against guards. And I'm not sure how to kind of square that with him. Like, I don't think he's Clint Capella as a prospect. I just kind of don't. Doesn't have that, same physical frame. Like, Clint has really filled out his body. I don't know if Robert Williams is going to fill out in that same way. And then the footwork, I don't think he has that same, quick twitch footwork that Clint Capella has either.
I think those are fair. I mean, I think I've seen enough to where I feel at least it's in his range of outcomes. And for me, sure, he has the mobility to do that. He doesn't sit down in a stance a lot of the time, so it's hard to analyze. When he does get in space, he kind of plays a little high in his stance. But I do think he has the nimbleness there. That's just he's going to have to win that way. I think that's going to be his main allure at the next level, is switching, but also providing some rim protection off the ball. I just don't know if I trust him quite enough there as far as making the rotations, being engaged all the time as a team defender. That's where it comes down to for me, because you kind of know what he is offensively, and he's not going to play the same role as college again. He's not going to be a 4. He's definitely a 5. Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning, despite the fact that he played with, almost always 2 centers on the floor, occasionally 3 centers on the floor, 27% defensive rebounding rate. This dude is the elite of the elite when it comes down to pulling down defensive rebounds, and he's a good offensive rebounder too. Been up over that 10% threshold both of his seasons at Texas A&M. So there's a lot to like about Robert Williams. I just don't know 100% how to square it all yet, and that's why he comes just like right outside of my lottery range. And that's the same for me. It again comes back to the shooting somewhat, because I want to play 5 out and have a guy who can pick and pop. And at the highest levels, I don't know if Robert Williams dictates lineups enough as an individual creator in the post. And if he can't shoot, I think that you can switch a smaller wing onto him, and maybe he's going to be good on the offensive glass. So that is his one plus there. He can make you pay there, but I don't know if he's enough of a threat. But I like his self-awareness. In the interviews they had with ESPN about, he was just basically saying, I don't need to score. I can do all the small things. So he's saying the right things, at least, so our team can. I don't know if that's going to be the case as far as it translating, but at least he has the right approach where I'm a glue guy, I'm an energy guy, I'm going to do all the small things to help a team win. Yep. Cole, here's the problem. 66% of men lose their hair by age 35, but the thing is that when you start to notice hair loss, it's already too late. If that hairline is slowly starting to move backwards and you got some bald spots coming in, I have a solution for you. It's forhims.com, a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, sexual wellness for men. Thanks to science, baldness can be optional. Hims connects you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. Well-known generic supplements to name-brand prescriptions that will actually help you keep your hair. These are not snake oil pills or gas station counter supplements. There's no waiting room, no awkward doctor visits. You save hours by just going to forhims.com. It really is so easy. You just answer a few quick questions and a doctor will review it and prescribe it for you. For Hims, as someone who started losing their hair, well, I would say probably when I was about 22 years old. For Hims is just a fantastic supplement if you really need to try and combat that hair loss problem. If you order now, my listeners are going to get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now while supplies last. See the website for details. This would cost hundreds of dollars if you went to a doctor or a pharmacy. Go to forhims.com/game theory. That's forhims.com/game theory, GAMETHEORY, forhims.com/game theory. Cole, let's get into the lottery here. Number 14, Lonnie Walker. Another guy that, because of the situation he was thrust into this year, a very difficult eval. Absolutely, and I think that you can see he's going to look really good in a workout setting, first and foremost. Maybe out of all the guys in this range, he's going to look the best because he's super athletic and he can shoot the ball. Like we've talked about his mechanics ad nauseum this year. They're repeatable, they're concise. We've seen it off the catch. He even has a pull-up 3 in his game. Not a lot of wings can do that proficiently from range. So there's a lot to like about him, and he's apparently a great kid. So I think he's going to interview well there. It just comes down to, the tape this year wasn't very convincing. I think this is kind of an archetype where you don't see the high-level team defense instincts. He kind of doesn't have a high motor playing off the ball defensively. And his IQ, I just don't see a lot of purpose in his game. So I think that's what you're getting at when we say he's a harder evals, because the physical talent is there in conjunction with the shooting, but a lot of the ancillary skills that usually make or break a prospect aren't there cleanly for me. Yeah, he's a really, really tough one for a lot of different reasons. So Miami this year was, I don't want to say they were like totally incoherent,
but they just went through a lot of different iterations, and they had a lot of low IQ players next to him. First and foremost, like Bruce Brown started the year as their point guard and then gets hurt and misses half of the season. So then, Chris Likes steps into a bigger role. Chris Likes is a 5'7", shoot first, second, and third point guard. Then you have the Jaquan Newton experience, where Jaquan Newton is a guy that when his game runs hot, he can legitimately win you basketball games. When his game is running cold, he is just significantly harming you when he's not on the floor. When he's on the floor. So it's really difficult, I think, to put Lonnie Walker in a situation where he doesn't have a lead guard who's going to get him the ball consistently, doesn't have much in the way of spacing from the front court. Really only Anthony Lawrence is a guy who was knocking down shots from distance for Miami. They had guys like Abuka Uzundu and DeJuan Hewell playing as, big centers who were pick and roll dive guys and offensive rebounders. So there wasn't a whole lot of space for him to operate. There wasn't a whole lot of ball movement within their offense. And Lonnie Walker is a guy who thrives on spot up situations. He's a guy that is going to be great when you get him into an NBA settings and you have ball reversals going left and right, and you have the ball moving around, and he can attack and either stop at the elbow and pass it out or go on ahead and go up for a layup or a dunk. He is so difficult to evaluate because of the Miami situation, I think.
Yeah, they had all the perimeter ball handlers. He didn't get it. I mean, he got more of a chance when Bruce Brown went down to initiate some sets. I thought that was pretty lukewarm as far as the results go there. He is unselfish. I think that's mainly something with him is like he will make extra passes and stuff, but I don't think he doesn't read the floor at a high level. He does make some pocket passes, but mostly his vision is centralized around the primary action. I like his fit in the modern game in theory because I do think his feet are really good defensively. He has the length to really switch, I think, maybe 2-3 positions comfortably because I do think on ball he has that lateral quickness that's going to be coveted. It just comes down to can he be much outside of a switch guy? And that even requires instincts as far as knowing when to switch, when to communicate, when to execute those sets. And then offensively, I do trust his I trust a spot-up shot for sure off the catch, but can he shoot it all off movement? For like a team like Philadelphia, for example, which is one of the first teams I think that could entertain taking him, they run a lot of off-screen actions with their ancillary players. Can he handle an offense like that? Can he shoot off the move? We didn't see a ton of it. Honestly, at Miami, there was a couple fadeaway actions, not a lot of three-point shots off those sets. So when you just boil down his game to that and how it really translates to value, it's like outside of shooting and switchability in theory, I don't know if he really has a lot in his game. I do trust his ability to attack closeouts, though. Like you noted, the first step in those situations is pretty lethal. He can get to the basket. We see the in-air adjustment craft at the rim. But I just keep coming back to the fact that a lot of guys with his profile, athleticism, intersection with shooting that don't have high feel level have honestly come up short in the past. So I'm a little wary of him.
I think I agree with you in terms of all of your concerns. Just kind of being real about it. And looking at my board now, I think I might slide him down from where he's at number 14. I think he's still a tier 4 guy, but I might move him down to like 17 or something like that. Because the more I look at him, he is not a lead ball handler. Like the popular comparison is that he's this year's Donovan Mitchell.
No,
that's not him. That just straight up is not him. He is a off guard who can handle it a little bit, but he's not going to be this primary initiator who is going to buzz in and out of the lane and create shots. He's more of a finisher type. He doesn't have like incredible vision, doesn't have incredible just ball handling ability in general. He's more of just an athlete who gets by on having a quick first step, having great repeatable shooting mechanics, and being able to really leap up and finish above the rim. So, I mean, I'll probably move him down to like 16 after looking at this. Like I might have Troy Brown ahead of him, but it's not an easy fit for Lonnie Walker based off of what he's shown now. Now, the future of Lonnie Walker, you hope, is a three-point shooter who hits 40% of his threes, who can be a switchable defender and attacks closeouts well. If he does those three things, he's a starting two guard in the NBA. He has that athletic potential, but I don't think that he's like a star player at the next level. I don't think he really has that like ceiling outcome really.
Yeah, I can't put any of that any better. I'm glad you touched on the handle. He's kind of a palm dribbler to me. He doesn't have a ton of control, especially in traffic. So can he keep his dribble live in traffic if he's running a pick and roll? I get some legitimate questions there. It comes down to me for the shooting. How high do you think his ceiling can be there? And I think he has that ceiling in his range of outcomes just because of his mechanics, especially off the catch. I think he can get there, 40% threes. He's going to have to be an impact shooter, though, to really return value in the lottery. Like, if you're going to take him over Miles Bridges, I just don't agree with that. I think Miles Bridges does all the things that Lonnie Walker does. He's already proven the ability to shoot off movement at a high rate. He can attack closeouts. He has that dynamic athleticism. So I think people are going to talk themselves into Lonnie Walker high because he looks great in workouts. He's a great kid. And obviously, I hope he succeeds, but I think that I'm a little more skeptical. I have him still. He's a top 23 guy to me. He's going to end up in the latter half as far as maybe in the 17 to 23 range. At a certain point in this draft, he's going to become a valuable gamble because of a lot of plus qualities. I just think a lot of the negative qualities with him, if you take him at the 10, I think that's just too rich for my blood.
Yeah, I've got him at 14 here. Like I said, on the final board that I publish on The Athletic, I will probably slide him down just a couple of spots, but he'll still be a tier 4 guy for me just because I really do trust the shot. Like, remember Bradley Beal shot like 34% from 3 in college? Now, Beal had a lot more ball skill. In my opinion, like, you would be able to play him at point guard. That's why Bradley Beal went number 3 in that draft, and Lonnie Walker is going to go like 15 or 16. But what I think you see with Lonnie is a similar situation where you shouldn't just look at the percentage and go, this guy is a questionable shooter. I'm really not worried about him really shooting at the next level.
100%. Yeah, you have to, at least if you are buying on Lonnie Walker, you have to buy the shot, and I think there's a lot there to like. I would just advise people to go back and watch some of his pre-college tape. Yeah. Even like if it's just a mixed video, like Draft Express had one out, and just look at his strengths and weaknesses and see if they've improved over time. I think that's really valuable for a lot of prospects.
Yeah, and in Lonnie's case, I think it's valuable as well. Kevin Knox is the guy I have at number 13. He will end tier 4 here. Kevin Knox had an interesting year at Kentucky. Again, a situational issue whenever you're breaking down what Kevin Knox did this year and did not do. 15.6 points per game, 5.4 rebounds. Again, shot 34% from 3, 77% from the foul line. Rarely played what I think will be his NBA position, though. He was more of a 3 who occasionally even saw a couple minutes at the 2. Here and there. He is, to me, a pure 4 at the next level. He is going to be, I think, very successful at that because he's athletic. He's 6'9" with a 7-foot wingspan and can actually move his feet defensively and has the size to be able to play that role. But I just would have liked to have seen him do it more at the previous level.
He's definitely a 4 at the next level. I think his athleticism is kind of overrated overall. Like, that's been kind of something that you've noticed with him attacking closeouts. He's not that dynamic. He gets to his floater game, but he's not getting to the rim and ripping the rim down in 2 strides with heavy bursts. So I definitely like him at the 4 because I do think he can shoot the ball. He's another one of these guys with a projectable shot. Calipari used him off movement on the latter half of the season, so we'd come up those baseline floppy set screens and mostly for mid-range shots, but you can see that profiling to 3 over time. That's going to be his swinging skill for me as far as value is. How well can he shoot off the move at the 4 spot, because there are matchups that's going to be valuable to have a guy who can do that at that position, just because a lot of guys that are 4s can't really shoot off movement. So that's a deal with me as far as his offense. I don't see a lot of creation upside as far as individually. I think that maybe he sees himself that way, and I just don't know if he has the athleticism, the ball skills. He's not a great passer by any means. He's more of a self-creator if he's going to be in that role. I think he's more of an off-ball scorer, though. Maybe in a Tobias Harris mold as far as his ceiling outcome. I think he has that kind of ability in his range of outcomes. He's really, really young, so that's worth noting, but I just don't know if he impacts the game enough at both ends. Defensively, he can switch. He has the frame. I don't know if he has necessarily the lateral quickness to defend a bunch of different guys in space. I just worry about, he's another one of these guys that you see kind of a common thread among at least Lonnie Walker, Kevin Knox. Do they have feel? Do they know how to play the game? I think it's a legitimate question with Knox. So yeah, there are kind of 2 sides of the coin with Kevin Knox, because Kentucky this year was maybe the worst 3-point shooting team in the country. Do we think that that's an overstatement? No.
Yeah, like if you actually look at the numbers, it's not that far off of being accurate if it's not accurate. Kentucky this year, I'm just pulling them up now, took fewer threes than all but 7 teams in the entire country this year, and they only hit them at 35%. 8%. So this was not a team that was getting great floor spacing necessarily. And I think that really hindered what Knox was able to show as a driver and as a slasher. Because whenever he was at lower levels, that's kind of what his game was, first and foremost. He was a driver, finisher, guy who could get into the lane and kind of rise above everyone and throw down. Not what he ended up being at Kentucky. He was more of an off-screen shooter who shot it on the move and, was able to score a lot of points, but wasn't really able to show that because he didn't have the space to do it. Now, the flip side of that is I think he has really stiff hips. I think he is actually going to struggle to get separation laterally from NBA level defenders. Maybe not at the 4. I think at the 4, he can actually be a bit of a marginal advantage offensively just because he is going to be quicker than those guys. But there are some worries, in my opinion, that his ability to attack closeouts might be muted a little bit by the stiffer hips that he has.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at as far as maybe he's a better leaper than I'm getting him credit for, but just overall how it functionally translates to the floor. There's just a lot of times this season where I was kind of underwhelmed. Even when he had space to attack, it wasn't like he was dynamically explosive as far as first step and burst, as far as getting into the lane and attacking closeouts. And I think he has to win that way. What do you think? Their games aren't identical, but comparing him to a past Kentucky guy, what do you think about a comparison to Trey Lyles? I think Trey Lyles is much more skilled, but just as far as translating to the league, is that the role you kind of see him in, and how valuable is that really in the modern game?
I think Lyles is more of a 4-5 and Knox is more of a combo forward.
Yeah.
Lyles is like 7'4" wings, not 7'4". I think he's like 7'2" wingspan guy. 6'10". I think he even has an inch on him. Not as athletic as what Knox is either. Not as bursty, can't run off of screens the same way Knox can. I think that they're just going to play different roles in a lot of ways. With Knox, it's just a tough eval. Again, like all of the guys in this range are really, really difficult evals. And maybe that says something about my lack of creativity when it comes to building out, draft rankings, is that, I might slide these guys down a little bit because it's harder to figure out what their exact setting is. But in Knox's case, the reason that I'm a little bit higher on him than the rest of these guys, and I think NBA teams are actually a little bit higher on him than even I am, because I've talked to some that have him in the top 10 already. So I look at what Knox can do, and I look at the way he runs off of screens. I look at the fact that the jump shot, I think, is very projectable. I don't think he's going to have any issues knocking down jump shots off the move. It's just hard. And then defensively, what do we think of him defensively? Because I actually think that he is a 4 defensively that is going to have a little bit of switchability, but not a crazy amount because of the hips again.
That's where I come down to. And I think that's how he has to win. You want a 4 in the modern game who can switch, and I'm not totally sold on him there. I don't think he's a high-level team defender either. So it's a murky projection. I think the easiest thing about Knox is kind of what you're getting to, the executives, and he is a very projectable role, especially at 6'9", who can shoot the ball. There's always a role for guys like that. It just comes down to really can he optimize that role, because it's easy to get guys on the floor that can shoot, if you believe in Knox's shot off the catch, which I think we both do, and a little bit off movement. That's going to have some value. It just comes down to, does he bring enough of the ancillary skills? I just feel I don't like betting on guys high as far as if he goes in the top 10. That's way too rich for my blood with a guy like Knox, because I've never seen the feel. Even at Hoop Summit the week of practices, watching him there, just took a lot of bad shots. It just didn't seem like he knew what he was doing on the floor, and that's always been my issue with him, is how well does he really feel the game. But again, projectable role. He's going to be a top 20 guy for me. It's just I'm a little bit skeptical that he ever finds that high level ability. But a guy like Tobias Harris is definitely in his range of outcomes.
Let's move on. Mikal Bridges, I have at number 12. This will start tier 3 for me. I think I'm probably a little bit lower on Mikal Bridges than the rest of the internet. Would you think that that's right?
I think there's been a recent push actually against Mikal, so I think you're probably more in line with the consensus now. I don't think a lot of guys still have him top 9, top 10. I think it's more in the range that you're actually listing.
Really? Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better about where I have him then. So the thing that Mikal Bridges brings to the table is that for a fact he can shoot it off of movement, just straight up. He is a guy that is going to knock down shots in any situation. He hit 43.5% of his three-pointers this year on 6 attempts a game. very efficient as a scorer in general, 59.3 from 2-point range, although I think that number is probably a little bit inflated by the drug that is Villanova floor spacing. 85% from the line, though. Very, very good shooter. Defensively, he is a guy who is going to make an impact due to his ridiculous length, 7'2" wingspan, 6'7" height. More of a guy, though, despite those measurements, that is like a 1 through 3 defender as opposed to a down the lineup defender.
Yeah, I mean, his switch ability as far as strength, and he's already added a lot to his frame. If you read his background, he's worked really hard. Like he might be closer to tapped out physically than you'd expect, just because he's already put in the time. He redshirted, and he has that wiry build, long, lean muscles that I don't think is going to add a lot of girth. So I agree, he's more of a 2-3 defender than, I guess, a 3-4 defender. He's not OG Anunoby, of course, there. The allure with him is just he knows what the hell he's doing on the floor. He's played with Villanova. He knows how to move off the ball. He can make shots off movement, like you noted. His release point, to me, is special as far as how high it is. Yep. You don't see a lot of wings that can shoot from that high of a release point, because like shooting over the top, I know it's a low percentage shot, catching in the mid post and like turning over or off the bounce, but as many avenues to me as you can add value functionally with your shot, the better. And wings like that just don't have high release points. So that's his allure offensively, is you have to really believe in the shooting. Like if he doesn't shoot, I don't think he has anything offensively, but he hasn't enough to where you have to kind of buy it, at least to a certain extent. And then on defense, I just trust this kid, man. As far as team defense instincts, he knows where to be. His length is going to compensate a lot for his lack of like quick twitch athleticism. He's not the best in space. He's capable, but he's not like dynamic as far as a switch defender there. But he really can compensate with his length, like recovery situations. If he gets beat even by a half step, he has that 7'2" wingspan to really erase those errors. And I really value team defense with wings. I think that just he's someone that in a big game, as cliche as this sounds, I would trust him on both sides of the floor. We've seen it in college, and I trust that he'll know where to be. He's probably the best closeout defender in the class to me as far as balance, length. I think he's going to be really impactful for a team, especially a team that doesn't switch a ton during the regular season. They want a weak side guy to really, be well positioned, challenge shots at the rim, but also have the range and the length to close out. I think he's going to fill that role at a high level.
In terms of the body, Mikal Bridges came into Villanova at like somewhere below 180 pounds. He's now 210 pounds, which, again, I think kind of speaks to your point. I think he is pretty darn close to being physically developed. He might add like somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 10 pounds, but he's really, really done a lot of work on his body over the course of his time at Villanova, and I think it's a credit to him and their weight staff, but I don't know that there's going to be a ton of physical projection there. As a creator on the ball, not really a guy that I'm going to trust all that much to do anything. I think he got better at that this year, but he's still not someone that I want doing anything but attacking a super heavy closeout. And a big part of that is he's really not a great passer. Like, he's not a very instinctual passer who makes plays for his teammates off of that, like, closeout attack, passes it on the move, finds the guy in the corner, finds the guy on the opposite wing after the help comes down on him. It's just kind of not what his skill set is right now. He's more of a finisher, both in terms of, knocking down shots on the move off the catch, or knocking down or like finding these little spaces in cuts and being able to time cuts to the basket really well and, finishing around the basket. So offensively, he is your typical low usage 3-and-D guy. Defensively, it all comes down to scheme, like you said, I think. He is not someone that I would want on an island with super quick point guards regularly. I know that he often played the point of Villanova's press, but the idea of that was more he was in a zone guarding the top of an area, and it was a place where his help skills and a place where his length at the point of attack just kind of mattered. But in half-court settings, he can get blown by. Like, he can absolutely get to a point where he struggles to stay in front of guys who aren't like hyper quick because his limbs are so long and his legs are so long in general. I think it takes him just like that extra split second to get moving and into a defensive slide. And that gives an offensive player just a small amount of time to get by him. And this isn't to say he's not a good defender. He's a good defender for all of the reasons that Cole just enumerated. But I am a little bit worried about the team that drafts him, putting him into a defensive scheme that I think won't be conducive to what his talents are.
I think the overall takeaway from Bridges is there's a lot of things like he's developed, like he's ran more pick and roll his junior year. He's done more creation, but it comes down to what he can do versus what you actually want him to do. What comes down to for me is like he can at least add value shooting over the top. Like if you throw him the ball on a switch, he can just turn and face and shoot the ball over a smaller player. Like that's going to give him subtle avenues to contribute as a self-creator that I think might be undersold by a lot of the guys who just say like he's straight 3-and-D's, only a shooter. I think he's a little bit more than that just because of his release point. But I agree. I think ideally he's a low-usage player offensively that just plays within the scheme, but he can really move without the ball because that's been instilled in him. He was even good at that coming into Villanova. Jay Wright's talked about this. Is like he has an innate understanding for that. So if you can get him to a team, like a situation is going to be huge for him. So if he goes to Philadelphia, for example, like that's a great fit for him because he can shoot off movement. He knows how to move and play off of a guy like Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. That's the kind of situation you want him in. You don't want him to be a self-creator because he just doesn't have the handle. Guys with that long of wingspans just aren't natural dribblers for the most part. Like he doesn't have that tight control. And I think that you don't want him running a secondary even pick and roll. He's mostly a guy that has to be a gravity threat as an off-ball shooter. And defensively, again, like you noted, I think the switching is probably a little overrated with him. But what I keep coming back to is even if he loses a half step or a full step, he has the effort level. He's always played with high intensity, and he has the length to compensate. So I think that I'm buying his defense probably a little bit more than consensus just because he has the instincts and he has the length.
Yeah, and like I said, like I don't think he is a bad defender. I want that to be 100% clear. I think he's actually a really good defender. But there are worries there that I think will continue to need to bear themselves out over the future.
Sure.
The situations for him that I think make the most sense. Philadelphia, I think, should have him like at 5th or 6th on their board, just for what that organization needs. Chicago, I think, makes a lot of sense because of the offense Fred Hoiberg runs. He gets a lot of off-screen, off-ball movement from his shooters. I think that would actually be a really, really good spot for him. Cleveland, I don't know what to think of Cleveland yet. If Cleveland keeps LeBron, I think Mikal Bridges should be like 5th or 6th on their board too. But I don't know if they're going to have that indication yet, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's a tough sell with Cleveland. I think that his absolute floor is probably Denver at 14. I think that's a really good fit for him. Another team that values off-movement shooting. They can play off Nikola Jokic, so that's a really good fit for him as well. Yeah,
and that team really needs a 3. Like just a guy that you can place next to Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Nikola Jokic, and Paul Millsap as well, given the fact that he's there for another couple of years. So yeah, no, I like what all of those options present. If I was the Clippers, if I was even Charlotte to an extent, if I was New York even, and I still needed to find a point guard, I think, or Orlando, like I don't think I would have Mikal Bridges super high on my need list.
And I think that's fair. I mean, I have Mikal as a top 10 guy at the latter half, of course, of the top 10. So maybe at a certain point, he's just best player available. But he's more valuable in certain situations, especially when you already have the infrastructure, than he is if you're just building more from scratch. Because you don't want him in a high usage role. He's more of a complementary piece, but he can be a really impactful one, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's why I have him in tier 3. Like I think he is going to be an NBA starter. Like I'm not real worried about that. But the rest of the upside is where I'm a little bit worried. Number 11 is a guy that I think I'm lower on than most of the consensus for sure. Wendell Carter of Duke. Cole, you are a fan of Wendell Carter. Is that correct?
I love Wendell Carter. Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
Why are you a huge fan of Wendell Carter? Carter averaged 13.5 points, 9.1 rebounds, 2 assists, 2.1 blocks per game. 56% from the field, 41% from 3, 63 true shooting percentage, 28.2 PER. All of the metrics are there. Explain from a game perspective, though, why you like Wendell Carter.
I think he's the most modern offensive big in the class as far as what I covet from fives in the modern game as far as pick and pop ability. I love his mechanics from 3. I think his perimeter skills are undersold as far as he can attack a closeout. He's functionally capable as a ball handler, especially in bigger spaces. Like he's not going to face you up and cross you over twice, Boogie Cousins style, but he can attack a closeout for sure. I love his decision making on the move. I think that he's the best passing big, especially of the elites, as far as actually making decisions, not just vision, but executing plays. He's really cerebral. So if you combine that ability to dribble, pass, and shoot, he allows teams to play 5 out on offense. And I do think that he brings all of those in spades. Of course, I mean, your reservation point for sure is going to be the perimeter defense, correct?
Yeah, that's just straight up where I am super concerned.
And that's why I think that his stock is the most high if it makes sense. I mean, he's viewed as like this high floor, low ceiling prospect. I don't actually think that's necessarily true, but I do think there is some variance to him, because if you believe in the perimeter defense, you're going to have him really high. If you don't, you should have him pretty low, because that's the disconnect with a lot of guys. Is, do you believe his defense is mostly his foot speed this past season, or do you think it's more of the technique like I do? I think that a lot of his struggles were technique based. You see the flashes of the feet. I don't think he's going to be a switch defender by any means and like be super impactful, but he is long, and that's something that I look for from big defenders. Like, if you don't have length, it's hard for you to be really a switch defender. I don't care how agile you are. You're not keeping up with the quickest perimeter players in the league. It comes down to that length for me. I think that's going to be huge for him. Yeah,
like the thing with Wendell Carter that I really struggle with is the projection of where he's going, right? Because he came in at the combine in absolutely incredible shape. He had like just absurd body fat, look great. The thing that scares me, though, and to get them fully, I can give you the numbers. It was 7.8% body fat for a guy that is 251 pounds. Like that is a wild number. He is already in pretty darn close to what the best shape of his life will be. And he's like 6'10", 7'4" wingspan. That stuff I'm not real worried about. I'm worried about the fact that I think he is probably pretty darn close to physically maxed out, and that this year he really struggled to contain guys off the dribble. And part of it certainly was, as you mentioned, technique. He just hadn't done it in the way that you have to really guard in space at even a level like college basketball is. I really don't think his feet are super quick whenever you're talking about putting him on quick wings or quick guards. I don't think you can run a switching scheme straight up with him on the floor. You have to drop him back. Otherwise, he's going to get fried on the perimeter.
And that's definitely a credible argument for sure. I'm not saying with any kind of authority that I think he's going to be a dynamic switch defender, but I do think that his defense in space is a little underrated. I've seen, like, I'm worried about him attacking closeouts, or not attacking closeouts, but defending closeouts. I think his north-south change of direction worries me more than just his straight contain ability, because he like that's a real big concern for me. But with how little bigs really do that in the modern game as far as closeouts, maybe that's mitigated to an extent. I just see it. There's just a lot of technique stuff. We had Jackson Hoy on the Step In just write a piece on this. Is Wendell Carter basically athletic enough, quick enough to defend on the perimeter? He made a lot of good points as far as I think there's some balance issues with him. The technique as far as playing, more on the heels of his feet, just not really getting in a stance. That's the thing with is like I thought he was a pretty good technical player just because he's really cerebral. You see a lot of that offensively, but defensively,
his offensive technique's incredible.
Exactly, right. But I don't think that's the same on defense. I think that there's some upside there because of that. Like you noted, he's gotten in better shape post season. He looks ridiculously good as far as his build. Like he's really put in the time in the gym. If he gets even a little bit of added lateral explosiveness, I think it's going to threaten. I'm not saying it's going to be impactful, but if he can get by, his offense is going to be impactful because he can really do a lot of the things that give modern defenses a ton of problems.
Yeah, and the popular comparison for him is Al Horford, right? He's nowhere near the athlete Al Horford was coming out of Florida, I don't think. Al Horford has ridiculous footwork. He's a lot more agile than what Wendell Carter is. And maybe cerebrally and in terms of offensive skill set, it's there. But I think that that's what makes Carter more of like a future NBA starter than a high-end potential all-star, which is essentially where he's being priced at in most NBA draft projections right now.
Yeah, it's just tough because it comes down to, honestly, what you value in bigs in the modern game. Do you value the high ceiling kind of self-creators, the scorer types? I just think that Carter does a lot of things that ultimately, with lesser usage and just being able to shoot the three, are just super valuable. I really trust his shot, honestly, and he can post mismatches easily, so he's a threat there. He's just a multi-dimensional offensive player. I guess if you look at it from an all-star standpoint, I don't think Wendell Carter is a bet to make multiple all-star teams. And I think that your Al Horford analysis is right. I don't think the gap laterally as dire as I guess as gaping as you do as far as that goes. But Horford's definitely more agile. But Wendell Carter, I think, for his freshman year, he's way ahead of Horford as far as a shooter. So there are advantages to his game. So it just comes down to how much you buy and how much you value the ability to dribble, pass, and shoot on offense, and how much you you buy the space defense, because I do think that he reacts quickly off the ball defensively. He can challenge at the rim. He's got great verticality, contest. He has the length. If he had a 7'1" wingspan, I think this would be a really different conversation for me. But he does have underrated length, and I really value bigs that react quickly, know what they're doing. That's the inefficiency for me in the modern game, is just get as many smart players on the floor as you can, and they can adapt, because you can't scheme for those guys. And I think Wendell Carter is the smartest big in the class.
Yeah, and another thing that I think is worth bringing up as well is I think he's an underrated rim protector as well. That length really does play up at the basket. He is someone who blocked, I think, 2 shots a game, as I mentioned at the top here, but even just his size and girth really helps him around there whenever it comes to just taking up space at the basket.
Absolutely right. And I think the last point for me is just he's super self-aware. If you hear that guy talk, like he wants to fill a role. And I know there's a push for like the high upside offensive producers in this class, especially like DeAndre Ayton, Marvin Bagley. Those guys are going to be better scorers. But if you want a big to fill a role and be an I wouldn't even say just starter. I say an impact starter, potential all-star, but that contributes to winning basketball if he can defend in space. I think Carter's the guy, frankly. I just think that he does so many things. He already does so many things that are valuable in the modern game. Yeah,
very smart kid. Considered going to Harvard, had Georgia Tech on his last list as well, if I remember correctly. Obviously, went to Duke. Super high-end educational community that, someone like Marvin Bagley, who only had to do 3 years of high school, got into. It was, it's remarkable what Duke is doing right now to get in the smartest of high school kids. Shai Alexander is number 10 for me on my board. I am a pretty big fan of his, I would say, comparison to popular consensus. A player, 14.4 points, 4.1 rebounds, 5.1 assists, 48.5 field goal percentage, 40.4 from behind the 3-point line, 81.7 from the free throw line, 6'6" with a 7-foot wingspan, has the longest standing reach of any point guard to enter the NBA draft since Sean Livingston, if I remember correctly. Just a very weird, interesting, delightful prospect.
There's so much to like with him. Like I really enjoy watching him play basketball. Like he was easily Kentucky's best player this past season. I mean, he popped out. He took over. Like, he improved during the season. I mean, he obviously got that starting opportunity as the season went on, and he just transformed as a player. I watched him at Hoop Summit, in the past, and he just was not the same guy. So as far as improvement level, it's there. Like, he's on that upward trajectory as far as how you project guys moving forward. He's improved a lot. For me, I don't really buy the upside, and I think that's what you're getting at. If you're taking him in the top 10, you're believing in that ceiling outcome of maybe a potential impact starter at lead guard, or maybe you believe he's a wing. I just don't think he's a dynamic enough creator as far as pull-up ability, and he's not a dynamic athlete. And the narrow frame really hinders him around the rim. It hinders him carving out space, but he does have those horizontal length extension finishes. There's a lot to like. I just don't know really how well it translates to being an impact kind of high ceiling guy, if that makes sense.
So generally, I agree with that sentiment. I'm not sure how super duper high his ceiling is. I do think he is going to be a good starter at the next level, though. And the reason that I say that is he has all of the ball skills you're looking for in terms of dribble, pass, shoot, right? Like that's been your big thing you've stated throughout this podcast, right? Dribble, pass, shoot. You want guys who can do all three things. And in Shai's case, he has all that easy. Really good passer, can get into the lane. I think just because he's so long, his first step is underrated because of that length. Shooting ability, not a super confident shooter yet, but I think that there are plenty of reasons in terms of his mechanics that make you believe he's going to be a shooter, right? Like I'm really not super concerned about the shot.
I'm a little bit more skeptical. I'm not saying he can't shoot. I think it's definitely within his range of outcomes. I would view him even optimistically being at least a lower end, maybe not impact shooter, but capable shooter. It's just, I think his shot's kind of deliberate. Off the dribble, especially off the catch when he has time and space, I think it's fine. He just doesn't get a lot of input in his lower body, and it's a little bit, the whole process is kind of mechanical, and I just don't see the confidence. He has a low attempt rate from three. There's a lot of negatives with his profile there, but it comes down to me is how dynamic off the dribble do you think he can be as a shooter, as a ball handler? If you're viewing him as a lead guard, does he top out even at an average starting caliber lead guard in the class, or in the NBA? Those guys are really, really dynamic pull-up shooters, like Trae Young, I just don't see that for Shai.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with him is I'm not really even seeing him as like a full stop lead guard. I see him like maybe as someone who can probably take possessions as a lead guard. But for the most part, where I want him to go to a situation like Philadelphia or Milwaukee or somewhere like that, where they already have like a bigger lead ball handler and he can act as a secondary guy. I'm trying to think of like a couple of other, places where that can even be in the discussion. Like Cleveland, I think makes sense if LeBron stays there. Wherever LeBron goes in general, I think makes sense for a guy like him. Denver, I think would make sense for a guy like him because they have both Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic already sharing that lead ball handler ability. Those are the kind of places that I'm really interested in him because I think he's going to give you a lot of marginal value defensively as someone who can guard 1 through 3 right now. He's really, really good at contesting shots, really good at fighting through screens, despite his lack of girth right now. He just kind of gets small and gets around them and, actually really battles on that end. I think that that's more what you're talking about with marginal value of a guy like Shai Alexander. I think he's more of a really, really, really high-end rotational player who is going to be like a really good starter at the next level in situations like that.
I like what you noted there as far as pairing him with kind of a wing initiator type. Like if a team drafts Luka Doncic, I would look again to maybe pair him with a guy like Shai. So that understanding, we're on the same page as far as that goes. I've always viewed him as more of a secondary ball handler type, but he's got to shoot. He's got to shoot off movement a little bit. He's got to shoot off the catch. If you believe in that, I can understand drafting him around that range. For me, it just comes down to upside, frankly. Like how valuable is like a guy like that? To me, this is kind of a lazy comparison stylistically and size-wise. He looks like a less athletic version of Dalen Wright, and I love Dalen Wright as a rotation player. Obviously, Shai's much younger.
Less athletic?
I do, yeah.
Oh,
I watched Dalen in college, man. That guy, he's more explosive in and out of his moves, to me at least. He's a little bit more deceptive off the dribble, but let's say maybe the same level.
DeLon was 23 in college, though, too.
Exactly right. That's what I was getting at. My second point is like Shai is much younger. So if he can develop athletically at all, which I don't know, he's got a really wiry build. I mean, we're talking about someone who's 3 pounds heavier than Trae Young at 6'6". Like he's got really pretty wire. So if he can add explosiveness, then absolutely. If he can get to that kind of player, which I really value. I like Dalen, of course. If you're viewing him as that kind of general archetype, and of course Shai can develop over the next 3-4 years to a level that exceeds that. It's just that's more of the role that I see him in, is like a quality rotation piece, maybe a lower end starter. In this class, I don't have him top 10 just because, again, I don't believe in the upside, but I do believe in him as an NBA player, if that makes sense.
So I guess that what I would ask you is, and we've kind of gone over it already because you don't really believe in the jump shot as much as I do. For reference, took 39 jump shots off the catch this season, hit them at a 67.9 effective field goal percentage. Not a big enough sample to really take a ton away from. Took 76 jump shots off the dribble, was in the 65th percentile there, 43% effective field goal percentage. Not as good, but, for a guy who came into college as a questionable shooter, I think that it shows a lot of upward growth and trajectory there. Just kind of talking to people who have seen him work out, he is a guy that just has been better in workouts. It seems like he's becoming a more confident shooter. That's something that I think is, I think he's going to be able to shoot it. And if you think he's going to be able to shoot it, I think it's a very unique and very enticing package of skills for a high-level starter at the next level.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. If you believe in the shot, like truly being above league average from 3, I think that's fine. It's a fine range. I like the player a lot. Again, I just don't know about the value. But I do think he's at least a rotation player in the league, and he's going to be in my top 20, of course, probably top 16 just because of that fact. I do think there's a role for him in the modern game as a secondary handler especially, but I just don't see the dynamic ability in any part of his game. I don't think he's great on ball defensively. I think he does get beat a lot. He's kind of Mikal, but he's not as good as Mikal on team defense, but just kind of the conception there as far as his length is definitely a factor. It's going to benefit him at the next level. I just don't know if he's going to be impactful enough on either side of the floor, but guys who can generally play both sides and aren't liabilities, if you have some two-way equity, I think you're probably, by basically default, you're a top 20 guy to me.
So here is what my argument would be there then, too. Shai Alexander on offense is a guy that we know can initiate some offensive sets at the NBA level, right? Like he might not be like a super initiator, but he'll be a guy that can actually initiate a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He has solid creation. Yeah, absolutely.
I think he's going to be able to shoot it. So, we'll disagree on that for now. If he can shoot it, teams are going to have to close out on him heavy, and he has the skills to put the ball on the deck and really create a ton of great advantageous situations in 4-on-5s or 5-on-4s offensively, where he's going to be able to pick out guys in the far corner, on the wing. He's going to be able to see where the help is coming from. In large part, he's going to be able to pass over them because of his size and length. And additionally, you mentioned the finishing ability, great extension finisher with length. That's going to translate, I think, pretty easily to the next level. So to me, that's like exactly what you're looking for from like a secondary offensive player, right?
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, his passing on the move, his kick-out vision is pretty special for a secondary guy. Like, he has legit point guard vision in those settings. I think that's honestly his best overall skill. Is his ability his vision on the move is really underrated. He's crafty. He can run a pick and roll. He can pass with either hand. There's a lot to like. I'm not objecting to that.
And the reason that I have him over a Wendell Carter is that I think that skill set is harder to find than a big guy who can bring as much as Wendell Carter does offensively, but has the defensive liability concerns. Because, like, let's be honest, that's not a crazy, like, tough thing to find on free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I just value when I think his defense is going to be a little bit better than you do. So that's the gap there. And I don't think you can find what Wendell Carter can do offensively on free agency. I think he's really underrated there as far as historically a guy who can do all these things at such a young age. I think he's a little undervalued in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I mean, I would say too, like, you can get Derek Favors in free agency, and Favors can't shoot it like Wendell can, but he can do everything else.
Yeah, I think Wendell's a better decision maker, and he's a little bit better as a ball handler, but that's one of my comps for Wendell, just as far as physical and skill set. But I do think that Wendell's already kind of more skilled than Favors is, like, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, the injuries kind of hurt Favors athletically, too.
Oh, for sure.
So he was a different beast coming out of college. Let's move on. Let's talk about my last guy in this podcast. Number 9, Collin Sexton. He is going to be one of the more... He's a really tough one for a lot of people, I would say, just because the skill set stuff is... all of the worries there are valid. Every single worry that you could bring up about Collin Sexton's skill set, I buy it. 33% three-point shooter. He's never really been a great three-point shooter at any level. Not a great passer. Very tunnel vision-y. Gets a ton of just terrible tunnel vision stuff where he'll turn the ball over and just not even look for his teammates, despite the fact that at Alabama this year, he had a talented supporting cast. Like, I don't think that you can say this is a Ben Simmons situation and Simmons was obviously just on a different plane as a passer, but like Simmons would occasionally get selfish. This is not one of those cases because Alabama this year, final 32 of the NCAA tournament, probably has a future first-round pick in Herbert Jones, a potential NBA draft pick in John Petty, and another potential NBA draft pick in Dante Hall, probably more of a G League guy in Hall's case. But, like, Alabama was good this year. And Dazon Ingram, Braxton Key, both guys that are really solid college basketball players, just was not... It ended up enabling a lot of the worst parts of Collin Sexton's game, seeing him do this.
Yeah, in the situation, I'm glad you hit on that. It was a lot better than people probably give it credit for. I don't think it necessitated Collin Sexton to play the way he did at certain times, but that's always been his game. He's always been a self-creator. If you look at him in AAU, in high school, he had that burden in high school largely because he had to, but at the same time, he's never been a high-level creator for others. This has never been a part of his game. That's kind of why he, as far as my understanding, part of why he went to Alabama was to work with Avery Johnson and develop his point guard skills. I just didn't really see it, honestly. Like, there were flashes like there are with most players, most point guards, but can he see the entire floor? Is he a willing enough passer? Does he have drive and kick vision? Like, he goes into traffic a lot and he just tries to explode through two bodies at the rim. And I don't think he's a supreme athlete. I think he's a very good one for sure. He's not Dennis Smith. He's not De'Aaron Fox, like, at all. He's not that quick. He's not that explosive, especially around the basket. So it just comes down to, this is like a main philosophy point in the draft for me, is I get the conceptual upside. Like, he can be a Jeff Teague, maybe a Kemba Walker at his very, very, very highest ceiling outcome if he develops the shot. I get that. But do you want to marry your team for multiple years to a guy who needs the ball? And I don't necessarily think he's good enough with it, even long term, to really invest a lot of capital in the top 10.
So, yeah, I don't blame you for feeling that way. The guy that I keep comparing him to is Terry Rozier.
Okay.
Same sort of, really good athlete. Terry probably is really an elite athlete, isn't he?
He's borderline for me. Like, he's maybe a little bit better than Sexton there. That's an argument.
Yeah, like Terry probably is a little bit better of an athlete than Collin Sexton. But Sexton, 6'2.5", 6'7" wingspan, same kind of length, same kind of scoring mentality in college. Tried to play him at lead guard. Ended up having a lot of selfish moments as a lead guard. Guy that looks like he has potential to shoot it, but hasn't shown the jump shot yet. I do think he's going to shoot it eventually. Like, I just kind of trust that his mechanics will work themselves out. He takes a ton of jump shots off the dribble too, obviously. Was in the 80th percentile this year of jump shooters off of the dribble, 48 effective field goal percentage. That's actually pretty good for a player who handles the ball as much as he does and gets as much defensive attention as he does. The thing that it always comes back to with Collin Sexton is that he's a guy that myself and a lot of NBA executives are just kind of willing to bet on, because there's never been, at least in the last 6 years that I've been evaluating NBA drafts, however long it's been now, I've never seen a more competitive player enter the NBA draft process. Just never. He is a special breed when it comes to that. And he's the kind of guy that you want to bet on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the allure with him, frankly, is his personality, his work ethic, his competitiveness on the floor. If he didn't have those qualities, I wouldn't be interested in him basically at all. Like, that's the selling point for me. But you look at it in a vacuum and you're like, can you really bet on somebody because of their intangibles that high? I'm not saying, like, he obviously has game, but I just don't trust the shot enough. The mechanics aren't fluid to me. I mean, his free throw shot has always been good, but from three, I don't know if I want to bet on him at a high level there. Defensively, in theory, he's a good defender because he has the quickness, he has the physicality when he plays with effort. But I think a lot of his defense this year was kind of fake hustle. It was like looking like he's moving fast, but not actually defending.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think he's going to defend at the next level because I think he's going to have to defend. And really what we're talking about too is he going to defend in the playoffs? Like, in all reality here, he's going to defend in the playoffs. Like, he's going to work his ass off. He might get taken advantage of because he's smaller, but he'll defend in the playoffs because he'll actually give real hustle.
And I'm glad you made the size point, too, because this is something that I build into my analysis with point guards. Like, if you're a smaller guy, and Sexton plays a little bit bigger than his size. Trey Young plays a little bit smaller for his size. So if you're comparing those two, that's the difference as far as physicality. But if you're investing in a 6'1" guy, that's an issue. Or 6'2", I guess, tops. That you're going to incur trade-offs regardless of who that guy is, unless he's Chris Paul. Like, and he's not Chris Paul defensively. So do you really want to, again, invest in a guy that is going to be taken advantage of just by virtue of his size, that you have to really give the ball to? I think that's something, this is the most difficult part of the draft for me in analysis, is when do you want to take bets on those ceiling upside, if you believe in Sexton's upside, creators who take a lot off the table if they bust, right? Because if Sexton doesn't pan out, you could spend, I don't think he's going to be the level of like shooter or the degree of shooter that Elfrid Payton is, for example. I think he's going to be better than that. But you could spend 4 years trying to get somebody to develop, and they don't make their teammates better enough, and you're just giving them the ball. I have a lot of reservations about that, man, in the draft, especially at 6'1". I'll take bets on Trey Young all day because he has elite skill. Sexton, I'm much less willing to do so.
Sexton's bigger than 6'1". He's like 6'2.5", right?
I think at the combine he measured smaller than Trey, actually. I think he was a little bit under. He's like 6'1", 7'5", I want to say. I was kind of surprised. I thought he'd measuring bigger than that. Yeah,
and like you said, he plays bigger than, he was 6'1.5" with shoes on. So, so you're talking about a guy that's going to come in at 6'2" or whatever it'll be listed at, 6'7" and a quarter wingspan. I think that's a big selling point for him. But I agree with you. I totally buy the concerns. I totally understand where you're coming from. I'm just not betting against him. Like, he is maybe a borderline crazy person. And I mean that in the most affectionate way that I can. He is just something special that I'm okay taking a chance on if we're talking about like number 10 or 11 or number 9, which is where I have him right now. Like, if I'm the Knicks, I think that's the kind of guy I want next to Frank Ntilikina. Like, I want someone who is going to have that fuck you mentality. In New York, I think he would play up really well there. I think that his personality and mentality would really play up there. You saw him at Hoop Summit 2 years ago, and the stories coming out of Hoop Summit were that he was a much better distributor than what he'd shown in the past at EYBL, and a much better distributor than what he would show in the future at Alabama. Do you care about that at all based off of what you saw at Hoop Summit?
I think, honestly, a lot of that was just the previous expectation of him as a non-creator for others. And then he started playing pick-and-roll basketball at Hoop Summit. It's like, oh, he can do these things. So I think there was maybe a little bit of an overreaction just because we didn't really see that at a lower level. So you're kind of surprised when he started playing like a point guard and not like less athletic version of Allen Iverson, which is what a lot of people were comparing it to. But I don't think it's a high-level creator for others. I think we've seen that play out on the court. It was just more so at the Hoop Summit, a reaction to a surprising development that we didn't know exists, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Totally get the concerns on Collin Sexton. But he's a guy that if he hits, the ceiling outcome is like all-star, right?
It's definitely at that level. Like I said, I think he has slight Kemba Walker kind of overall upside there if he can really shoot the ball. And Kemba was an atypical case who really developed as a three-point shooter in like fifth season in the NBA, fourth season or something like that.
Yep.
So I don't expect him to take that leap. But for a team like the Clippers, if you're going to play, if I'm going to be totally fair about this, and you have two picks at 12 and 13, you don't really have a feature initiator. I could be taking Sexton and taking somebody else because that lessens the blow if he doesn't work out. I just, from a philosophy standpoint, I'm just not super high enough. If you're a lead initiator and you're taking so much off the table in certain respects, again, I'm just not sure if I want to bet on you so high, but it's really hard with Collin just because he's so likable. Like if you see him play at Hoop Summit, that was the biggest takeaway. He's just so damn fun, and not in like a gimmicky way, but in like that dude will just come on the floor and he'll like look to kill you. And we use that cliche a lot, but he personifies that more than anybody in this class. Like he's hyper competitive. His teams, even in scrimmages at Hoop Summit, those guys would win just because he is going to outwill you. I just don't know if he can outwill guys in the NBA because the talent is just too considerable.
What range will you have him in?
Oh, that's a great question. He's going to be top 20, but I think he might be the latter half. There's going to be a point in the draft where I look at the rankings and the players, and it's like, okay, I'm willing to bet on his upside. That's not an indictment of him overall. It's just more of a philosophy thing because I would trust a wing that can shoot. Like, I'm going to have Kevin Huerter ahead of him, which is very atypical probably for draft rankings, and I think that Collin has conceptual higher upside, but I just trust Huerter way more in the modern game I trust his safety to value, and even a guy like that can have legitimate upside as like a role player type. So that's kind of the guy he's going to go after, or people that I just feel much better about the projection in a vacuum.
So here's going to be where I kind of sell you on this, because you look at the teams drafting 12 through like 19, we'll say. The Clippers have 12 and 13, like you just said. If he's there, I think they should take him. Denver, not really a need for Denver because they already have their point guard in Jamal Murray, theoretically. Washington, 15, John Wall. But then you look at 16 through 19. If he's on the board at 16, Phoenix should run to the podium, right?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I guess in theory, yes. He'd be a good fit next to Devin Booker to ceiling. And they're trying, I guess with their timeline, though, from their reports, they're trying to win now. Do you think he can help them win now?
Collin Sexton, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, and Josh Jackson. That's a hyper-competitive five that might win now.
Yeah, just, again, the shooting would be an issue. It's more like the skill level. I think that Collin's always going to play hard. I'm not an issue with that. But as a lead guard who can't really shoot the ball at a high level, if he's initiating your offense, I don't know if you're winning now.
Yeah, I can see that. That's fair. Milwaukee, 17. I understand the fit concerns, but if he's there, I'm running to the podium and just being happy I have a point guard.
Yeah, I think you're making sound points as far as like team fit and stuff.
Yeah, San Antonio and Atlanta, 18 and 19. Neither of those teams, because I don't really think of DeJounte Murray as a point guard. Neither of those teams have their point guard of the future right now. So, again, you're running to the podium, right?
Atlanta, for me, at 19 makes the most sense of all of these teams because they're definitely building for the future, and they have nothing at point guard that they trust. Dennis Schroeder is on his way out. So at that range, that would align more with how I value Sexton and the team fit that I think could really optimize him long term.
If you're Atlanta, do you move up to get him?
That always comes at what is the cost of moving up, but I don't know. Like, again, this is not really even realistic because he's not going to fall this far, right? Like, I was talking about my personal big board as far as where I have him ranked. As far as falling in the draft, do you think he even gets past the Clippers at 12, 13?
Well, that's kind of what I guess I'm asking. Like, if you're Atlanta and they say, hey, we will trade you 12 for 19 and, I don't know, like Taurean Prince or John Collins. I probably don't do that because I like both of those guys, but I think about it.
If you were high on him, I would think about it. I wouldn't do that personally. Like I think I understood John Collins. I think he's a capable rotation player at very worst, and maybe a quality starter at his peak. And Taurean Prince is a wing. So for me personally, I wouldn't. But if you really do believe, this is the thing, if you believe in Collin Sexton's upside and you believe in him as a person, which a lot of people do, like, you need a primary initiator in the modern game. You need somebody who can initiate your offense. So if that's Atlanta, then it's probably worthwhile.
Yeah. Cole, the first half of this podcast is over. How are we doing?
Still hanging in there, man. Hour and 40 into it. I think this is going to be beneficial for the listeners, sussing all this out. And I always enjoy this podcast.
This is always a fun one every year. Again, go to forhims.com/game theory. You will get that trial to Hims. We'll be back on Thursday with more of the NBA draft breakdowns. Top 8 prospects on my board. That'll be a really fun one. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.